Okay, so this is a hopefully a bit of a quick tutorial with the basic fundamentals of animation. To be more specific, that is stretch and squash. So we're going to animate a ball. We're going to make it move across the screen, and we're going to deform the ball so that it looks like it would do in the real world. So let's get into this. So we're going to hit new composition for this one. This is all at your discretion. Just know if you increase the frame rate, then you're gonna have to account for the extra frames that you have in there. So personally, I'd just leave it at 29.97 for the time being until you become more comfortable with those different timings. I've got my duration set to 10 seconds. That should be absolutely plenty. And aside from that, I've not really changed anything from the default settings. I could call this bouncing ball, and then I'm just going to hit OK. So in the previous tutorial, we right-clicked into our project area to include more assets that we've created in a different piece of software, such as Illustrator. Today, we're going to be making our ball directly inside of After Effects, once again using vector imagery, but it'll just make the whole thing a little bit easier than transporting a circle over from Illustrator. So we're just going to right click into where our layers will go, and we're going to hit new, and then we're going to go for a shape layer. And I'll explain why we're doing it this way rather than coming up here and clicking and holding on there and going to the ellipse tool in a moment as well. So we're going to click on the little down arrow on our shape layer, and whilst we're at it, I'm just going to, with it highlighted, hit return just to rename our layer to ball. Inside of there, you'll see content and transform, and this little play icon here for add. We're going to do this 3 times. First time, we're going to add a group, which will be empty. The second time, we're going to add an ellipse, which is going to be our ball. And by doing this way, we don't automatically have a fill associated with our ball. So we're just going to hit add for the 3rd time and hit fill. And it'll default to a red more than likely for you. You can change that colour up here to your heart's content. I'll make mine a bit of a blue ball. So inside of here, we've now got lots of different options. We've got our contents, and then our group 1, and then ellipse path 1, fill 1, and we've got a transform for group 1 as well, which is independent of the original transform that we got when creating our shape layer, which is quite important because it allows us to do separate animations independent of each other, and you'll understand a little bit more about that by the end of the tutorial. So the reason why we've created a group is not only so we've got 2 separate transforms, but it also gives us some extra options in here as well that I wanted to talk about. We've got skew and skew axis, which allows us to deform our things a little bit more. I think that's pretty much everything that's different with it. But again, the most important reason why we added the group is to have 2 areas that we could animate a single object independently of each other. Okay, so first place we'll go is ellipse path 1, and our ball's a little bit small at the moment, so currently it's at obviously 100% size. We're going to make that 200% size to double its size, and then we're never going to go back in there. Okay. Majority of our work is going to be in transform group 1, and the 2 that we're going to be using today are position and scale. So with your timeline at 0, we'll hit both of those stopwatches, and by doing that, when we press U now, we're only going to have the layers visible that have keyframes associated with them. So if I do that now, pressed U, and now all of the extra fluff that we don't need is hidden away from us. It's not deleted, it's just hidden. Okay, so at frame 0, we're going to uncheck the little links there next to scale. That's going to allow us to change these values independently of each other, so we can deform our ball as needed and as necessary to give it that realistic look. So I'm going to type in the values 120 into the first field. I'll hit tab to go to the second field and hit 80 and then hit return. And that'll give our ball that squashed look. So we've done that. We've got a keyframe in position already, so we can just drag this down. I'm going to drag it down and hold shift so that it stays directly center of the screen. And we have our first position squashed down at the bottom. So in order to move on incrementally and know exactly where our timeline's up to, so we get a nice smooth animation, I'm going to hold shift and press page down twice. Okay, and that's going to move 20 frames. So when you hold shift and press page down, that's going to move 10 frames. If you don't hold shift, it'll just move 1 frame. Okay, so with this one, we're just going to click and we're going to drag whilst holding shift roughly near the top of the screen, and that'll give us a keyframe in our position. At the top of the animation, the ball's going to return to its original form, so we want to put these values in scale back to 100, tab, 100, enter. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit more about the squashing and stretching when we've got something to look at. So I'm going to hold shift page down twice again. It's going to move me forward 20 frames. And rather than trying to reposition our initial area, where our ball initially was, the easier way to do it is just to click and drag, marquee select the first 2 keyframes, hit Control C, and wherever your timeline's currently at, if you hit Control V, it's going to paste those values, those keyframes into that position. I'm going to hit N, just so when we do playback, it should just loop this area here rather than going all the full 10 seconds. So let's hit space now. Okay, it's looking okay. Not brilliant, not really very lifelike, but we can work on that now. So we've got that, the down, the up, and the return, so that it does a full loop. Let's have a look at the in-between bits now to ensure that we're getting a bit of a stretch on there, because currently we've got the squash and we've got the return to normal, but no stretch. So I'm going to hit shift and then page down once, and I'm going to reverse the values in scale this time. So I had 120 in the first one and 80 in the second one. This time I'm going to do 80 in the first one and 120 in the second one. And once again, we can hold Control C for that, because that keyframe will be selected. If we hold shift and page down and press that twice, and then Control C, that's going to give us our squash. So once again, it's still looking a little bit robotic, a little bit like in the Snowy Town tutorial. So you may have guessed it, we're going to add some easy ease into these frames now. So I'm going to click and drag until all of my keyframes are selected, and then I'm just going to press F9. And it's starting to look a little bit better. There's a little bit more inertia, momentum, but we can still do more. So on each of your layers here, we haven't discussed this bit here yet, but we've got the option to a few different options to blanket cover all of our keyframes that we have in here with a certain effect, things that you would usually use. You do have all of your effects presets here on the right hand side. I think my head's blocking the way a little bit, but these are ones that you could potentially use very, very often. So one of those is the motion blur option. We're going to check motion blur and we'll hit space again. And it's starting to look a little bit better now. But we do need to go into the graph editor just to do one more thing, and that is for this very, very top position. So when the ball is at the top here, if we just look very quickly, it's kind of floating back up, isn't it? It's floating back up and then it's floating back down. There's no, you can't really observe gravity in this situation, and that's what we want to accomplish with this. So highlighting that middle keyframe, position keyframe, we're going to go into our graph editor, and if you can't see this, go down here to the second option across, and that is your choose graph type and options, and you're more than likely set to this one here, which is edit value graph. We want to be on edit speed graph. So if we just look at this in the graph, the graphs can be a little bit confusing, but when you get a little bit more used to working within the software, you'll start to understand what these arches kind of mean. So if we look here, we've got it's moving upwards, and it's at that peak there where it's at the its most squashed, and its speed is at its highest, and then it goes down here, and you might be thinking, well, that's the bottom one, that's the top one, and that's the bottom one again, so why are they all in the same line? That is indicating how much speed is happening at that particular time. So there's the most speed is when it is mid-flow on those two arches there, so that's where the speed is taking place. So at the moment it's a very it's been eased, so it's got the curvature to it, but it's not showing that illusion of gravity, and we can do that quite easily here just by grabbing these handles from the middle anchor point, the middle ball position, and just dragging those away from that middle anchor point. And now if we hit play on that, it's got a bit of hang time at the top now, kind of stops, and then gravity reclaims it and brings it back down to earth again, and then the bounces it back up again. So again, this is, you know, it's not the easiest thing to decipher straight off the bat, but the more time you spend in here, the more you'll kind of get to understand what these curves mean. And in a later tutorial, we go into the graph editor, and you can actually visually see what is taking place when we're doing trajectory and arches and that sort of stuff. So this one's a little bit more confusing, but that's okay. So yeah, we've got quite a nice bounce there now. So the next section is kind of up to you. It really depends on how fast or slow you want your ball to bounce. For the sake of showing you a few more shortcuts, I'm gonna speed this up by double speed. So I'm going to position if I go right back to my start of my timeline and hit page down twice, that should take me right to that middle bit to ensure I'm definitely on the right keyframe. I'm going to select all of my keyframes, and then if I just want to kind of squash them all together but keep the distance equal between all of the frames, with them all selected, I can just hold Alt, grab the last keyframe and just drag that. That's going to keep them distributed appropriately. And if I've put my timeline right in the middle, all I need to do is bring those keyframes to that middle section there. I'll hit N again, and we've got a slightly faster bouncing ball, which is cool, which is great. Okay. As you can see, if you stop it kind of mid-frame and have a little look, this is your motion blur here, just helping each of the frames transition into each other and giving it a little bit more of a realistic look for us. Wonderful. So we've got our ball bouncing. Now we want to make it move across the screen. So I'm just going to reopen up all of the bits and bobs inside of this layer. So we're working in transform group 1 for the bouncing animation. We're now going to go into the regular default layer transform, and we're going to use the position keyframe in here. So I'm just going to hit position there, and I'll just hit U again just to bring all of the ones we've got keyframed up. And I'm going to drag this right the way back out for our whole 10 seconds. And because I've already hit the stopwatch on the position, we've got a keyframe here. I'm just going to click and drag our ball. I'll hold shift again just to make sure it stays absolutely on the horizontal. And then I'm going to go all the way to the other end of my timeline, which should be 10 seconds. And I'm just going to drag this once again, holding shift to ensure that line stays nice and straight, and then release it. Okay, so if I hit spacebar now, we've got a bit of an issue. Our ball does its initial bounce. Now, we had shortened our timeline earlier on, so it was just looping that section of the timeline prior. But now we've got the full 10 seconds. All we're getting is a bit of a miserable squashed ball sliding across the screen. So how do we rectify that? Now, we can use something called expressions. Expressions are something that are super powerful in the software. They can really help you out with a number of different things. I'm not going to get into them too deeply today. I'm just going to show you how to activate them and use a simple loop out just to get these keyframes just to loop continuously across the 10 seconds without having to duplicate all of these keyframes. So holding Alt, you're going to left click onto the position stopwatch. If you hold Alt down and click, it's going to give you this area here, something that you can type into, and it looks quite codey and that sort of stuff, and it is to an extent, but for what we're going to be using it for today, it's not too scary. So inside of this little dialog box, ignoring this content group 1 transform position, we're just going to type LOOP loop and then OUT out, all one word, and then just hit return or enter. Okay, sometimes it'll go inside of the brackets there. Just click out if it does, and that should finalize it for you. Now, we could do the same on scale, but we can just click on position now that we've done this, right click and copy expression only. And then when we click onto scale and hit Control and V, that should copy that loop out directly onto scale as well. So when we hit spacebar, it's going to continuously loop any keyframes that it finds on these layers. And we've got a nice bouncing ball. Excellent. Now, using the loop out gives you very little room to edit any of the specific bounces. You could duplicate, rather than doing the loop outs, you could duplicate these, ensuring that you've got exact spacing throughout. Copy and paste them by highlighting them like that. Control C, and then we'll do a quick page down and Control V. Oh no, don't do all of them, just do the first 2 like that. And that'll give you those bounces. I know I've still got the loop out, so it's probably actually not doing anything, but you could paste all the way across, and then you could edit each individual bounce. So if you wanted it to bounce up a flight of stairs or down a flight of stairs, probably more logical, then you could do that with the individual keyframes. But for the purposes of this, the loop out is absolutely fine, and it's doing what we want it to do. Okay, so very quickly we'll just save our project, because as usual I'm forgetting to do that. Bouncing ball, I've already got one in here, so I'm just going to call that O2, hit save, and then I'll just go through this again. I know I did it in the last video, but export, add to Adobe Media Encoder queue. And I've got one in here already. I'm just going to remove that. And H.264, match source, adaptive high bitrate, should be absolutely fine for this. Click on the output file to navigate to where you want it to go. And then when you're happy, and it says MP4 there, just hit play. Brilliant. And when it's done, just click on there. Should make a new folder for you, give you a project file and a video output of your render. Brilliant. That's everything. Thank you very much. Hopefully that one makes a little bit more sense to you. Can be a bit difficult using the loop in and outs and that sort of stuff. But if you've got any questions, just ask me during session. All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.